People say schools are supposed to be places of learning, bright, safe, and full of life. But in some corners of Indonesia, certain schools hold something darker. Stories that have been whispered about for decades. Stories that teachers refuse to talk about and janitors avoid after sunset. These are 5 true horror stories from schools across Indonesia. Stories sent in by real people who swore they would never step foot in their old classrooms again. I went to a private high school in a quiet city not far from Jakarta. It was one of those old buildings left from the Dutch colonial era. Long hallways, high ceilings, and wooden doors that creaked no matter how careful you were. The air always smelled faintly of dust and rain, like the place had been forgotten by time. There was a bathroom on the 2nd floor that everyone knew about, but no one dared to use. It was always locked. The teachers never talked about it, and the janitor avoided that side of the hallway completely. The restrooms near the canteen were fine, but that one, the one near the art room, it was different. Cold, even in the middle of the afternoon. When I was in 11th grade, my curiosity started to get the better of me. I asked one of the seniors why that door was always chained shut. She looked at me, her face turning serious, and said quietly, "Someone died in there." The story was that a girl, a student, had taken her own life in that bathroom years ago. They found her hanging from the pipe above the last stall. Some said it was because of bullying. Others whispered it was something darker, something that followed her home. After her death, students reported hearing footsteps or sobbing sounds coming from behind the locked door when no one was inside. I didn't believe it, at least not until the night it happened. That evening, my friends and I stayed late to finish a group project. The classrooms emptied one by one until it was just me. I remember the sound of my pen scratching the paper, the faint buzz of the lights above, and then silence. That kind of silence that presses against your ears. I started to pack up when I heard it, a slow dripping sound coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was the janitor cleaning up, but when I looked outside, the corridor was empty. The dripping stopped. Then came another sound, a low, muffled humming. It was faint, like someone singing behind a closed door. It was coming from the locked bathroom. I froze, every hair on my arm standing on end. The air around me felt heavier. The light above the doorway flickered once, then again. I told myself it was just a broken wire. But then something hit the floor inside, a dull thump like a body collapsing. I took a step closer, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear. The padlock on the door was still there, but it was hanging open. I swear it had been locked earlier that day. I called out, "Is anyone in there?" My voice sounded smaller than I expected. No answer, just that faint smell of jasmine, sweet, floral, the same scent they use in funeral rituals here. Then a single knock came from inside, slow, heavy, deliberate. I stepped back, too scared to move, but too terrified to look away. The door rattled, and through the small gap between the hinges, I saw something. A glimpse of pale skin, like a face pressed against the wood. I couldn't see the eyes, but I knew they were looking at me. I turned and ran. I didn't even bother turning off the lights. When I reached the school gate, the guard asked me what happened. I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, like I was still hearing that humming in my ears. The next morning, everyone was whispering.
The janitor said he found the bathroom door open again, the lock on the floor, broken clean in half. Inside, hanging from the same pipe above the last stall, was a thick rope. The weird thing was, it looked new. Not something that had been there for years, but something freshly tied. The school sealed it again that same day. But from then on, no one stayed late on that floor. Sometimes, if you passed by just before sunset, you could still hear that quiet humming, soft, distant, like someone waiting for company. I graduated a year later, but I still dream about that hallway sometimes. In my dreams, I'm standing in front of that bathroom again, and the padlock is open, swinging slowly back and forth. And even though I never see her face, I always wake up knowing she's still inside.
The next story, sent by Andra, 2014. I went to a small high school in the center of Jakarta. The building wasn't that old, but the third floor always felt strange. The classrooms up there were narrow, and the air always carried this faint smell of old chalk and rain-soaked wood. For some reason, no one liked staying there after class. I was in class 11B. There were 28 of us, including the teacher, who was strict but kind. Everything felt normal until one morning, during roll call, our teacher frowned. She counted the students, paused, and then counted again. "There are 29 of you," she said. "Who's not on the list?" We laughed. Everyone insisted they were there, and she brushed it off as a mistake. But the next day, it happened again. 29 students, 28 names. That was the start. For the next few weeks, odd things began to happen. During lessons, we sometimes heard someone whisper answers from the back of the room, only to find no one there. Once, a pen rolled off a desk and stopped mid-floor, as if someone had caught it. When we took class photos, someone's face would always come out blurred, like something unseen had moved in front of the camera. At first, we joked about it. Someone even said, "Maybe we have an invisible classmate." But after a while, the jokes stopped being funny. There were days when the classroom felt so crowded that you could barely breathe, even when a few students were absent. One afternoon, our teacher left us alone for a few minutes during study hour. It was quiet, the kind of silence where you can hear the ceiling fan hum. Then one of my friends, Rico, turned pale. He pointed toward the back row. "Who's that sitting there?" We all turned. There was an empty chair. At least that's what we thought. But then slowly, the chair moved. Just a small shift, scraping against the floor. I wanted to believe it was the wind, but the windows were closed. The air was thick, heavy. Everyone stared, frozen, until the chair stopped moving. When the teacher came back, Rico tried to tell her. She just sighed and said, "Don't talk about that here." The way she said it, it didn't sound like disbelief. It sounded like fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the chair and how it moved like someone was sitting there. The next morning, when I walked into class, I saw something carved in the back of that same chair. It said, "Still here." I thought it was a prank, but when I ran my fingers over the letters, the wood felt rough, like it had been scratched by fingernails, not a knife. A few weeks later, during graduation season, our class went on a trip outside the city. We rented 2 buses.
Everyone was laughing, taking selfies, singing. It felt like maybe we'd left all that weirdness behind. Before we left, one of the teachers took a group photo inside the bus. I sat near the window with Rico beside me. We smiled, flashing peace signs, the kind of picture you'd post online and forget about. 2 days later, when the printed photo came back, I remember our teacher calling us over. Her hands were shaking. In the middle of the picture, right between me and Rico, was a girl we didn't know. Her skin was pale, her hair tied up neatly, her smile small, but her eyes were all black, like 2 empty holes. Her uniform was the same as ours, but older, like something from a different decade. We checked every record, every class list. No Nadia existed, not in our year, not ever. Sometimes, when I dream, I'm back in that classroom again, the one that always felt too full. I hear the teacher calling names one by one. When she says, "Nadia," I hear someone in the back softly whisper, "Present."
The next story, sent by Leela, 2013. My cousin went to one of 2 sister schools that shared an old colonial building in West Java. The structure had been standing since the early 1900s. Pale yellow walls, tall windows, and echoing hallways that smelled like chalk and rain. Everyone in that city knew about the ghost that haunted those schools. Her name was Nancy. No one knew who Nancy really was. Some said she was a Dutch girl who lived there during the occupation. Others believed she was a teacher who was assaulted and murdered in one of the classrooms. Every version ended the same way. She never left. Students said she showed up most often in the mirror at the end of the 3rd floor hallway. If you walked by at the wrong time, you might see her reflection behind you, even if the corridor was empty. People said she had blonde hair, pale skin, and eyes that didn't blink. There was an old janitor named Mong Ucha who had worked there for decades. He claimed Nancy could be calmed if you spoke to her gently. He used to leave small offerings near the stairwell, incense and flowers, whispering prayers under his breath. When he did, the flickering lights would steady and the sound of footsteps would fade. My cousin never believed the stories until her final year. It was late one afternoon, and she and her drama club friends were rehearsing for a play. The rest of the school was empty. Around 6 p.m., the lights began to dim, and the building grew quiet in that heavy, unnatural way, the kind that presses against your chest. She was gathering her bag when someone started humming near the stage. It was soft, distant, like an old lullaby. Thinking it was one of her friends, she called out, but no one answered. Then, behind the curtain, she saw a woman standing there, tall, elegant, wearing a white dress that looked decades out of place. My cousin said she felt cold all over, but before she could say anything, the woman turned slightly and smiled. Her skin was gray, her eyes empty. When she screamed, the woman vanished. The others came running, but when they looked, there were wet footprints leading from the curtain toward the exit door. That door had been locked the entire evening. After that, strange things kept happening.
Every week, a student claimed to see a figure sitting at the back of the classroom after sunset, facing the window. Some said Nancy liked to mimic people's voices, that if she called your name after dark, you shouldn't answer. One night, a teacher stayed behind to grade papers. Around midnight, she heard a knock on the staff room door. When she opened it, no one was there, only a faint perfume, floral and heavy, hanging in the air. She shut the door quickly. The next morning, the janitor found a single high-heeled shoe lying in the hallway. It was old, leather cracked and faded. When he picked it up, it was still damp, as if it had been walking through rain. The headmaster tried to keep it quiet, but the rumors spread again. People said Nancy had followed someone home that night, that once you see her, she doesn't stay behind. To this day, the two schools still share that building. They repainted the walls, fixed the floors, even replaced the mirrors. But every few years, someone new swears they see her reflection smiling back at them, just before the lights flicker out.
The next story, sent by Demas, 2011. I grew up in Malang, a quiet city with more history than people like to admit. My high school was built on land that once held a Dutch military post. Beneath the main building, there were tunnels and storage rooms sealed long before any of us were born. The rumor was that the basement had been used to torture prisoners during the occupation. Teachers said that was nonsense, but every time it rained, the floors upstairs smelled faintly of iron, like rust and blood. One morning, the janitor found a dark stain near the stairwell. It looked like spilled paint at first, but it was sticky and smelled metallic. They scrubbed it clean, but by the next day, it had reappeared, darker, spreading wider across the tiles. The principal blamed the plumbing. The janitors replaced the tiles completely, but within a week, the red seeped through again. One evening, I stayed late with a few classmates for group work. Around 8 p.m., the lights started flickering, and we decided to pack up. As we walked past the hallway, I noticed wet footprints leading away from the bathroom, bare, faintly red like someone had stepped in liquid. I followed them halfway before realizing they were leading toward the sealed basement door. The smell hit me then, copper and earth. Suddenly, the sound of dripping echoed down the corridor. I turned to my friend, but she was already backing away. We heard it again, slow, rhythmic drops hitting the floor. When I looked down, there was a thin trail of blood running between the tiles, winding towards the basement. I remember whispering, "It's coming from underneath." The janitor found us moments later and dragged us away. He locked the basement door, muttering prayers under his breath. He told us to never, ever go near that hallway again. The next morning, he didn't show up for work. They said he quit suddenly. Weeks passed, and the smell didn't go away. Some teachers started complaining about headaches. Students began hearing whispers through the ventilation grates, like someone murmuring just beneath the floor. One night, the security guard swore he saw something crawl out of the drain near the stairs, a pale hand gripping the tile, before vanishing again. They tried blessing the place, even pouring concrete over the basement entrance. But a few months later,
When new tiles were laid, the stains began bleeding through once more. To this day, if you visit that hallway during the rainy season, you can still see it, faint, dark red beneath the surface. No matter how many times they cover it, the blood always finds its way back.
The next story, sent by Bima, 2015. In my hometown, our school stood on land that had once been a battlefield during the War for Independence. The flag ceremony every Monday morning was supposed to be a routine. Lines of students in white uniforms, sunlight glinting off the flagpole, the national anthem echoing through the courtyard. But everyone at that school knew something was off about those ceremonies. There was always an eerie stillness before the flag was raised, like the air itself was holding its breath. It started small. Students at the back noticed shadows that didn't match anyone standing in front of them. When they shifted position, the shadows stayed. Teachers told them to stand straight and not to fidget. One morning, during the anthem, a student fainted. She said she saw an extra row of students at the front, men, not kids, wearing torn military uniforms from decades ago. Their faces were gray, eyes empty, bodies swaying in time with the music. No one believed her until it kept happening. Every Independence Day, when the whole school gathered, more people began seeing them. Rows of silent soldiers standing at attention, uniforms faded, some missing shoes, some missing parts of their faces. I saw them once. It was during a rehearsal for the flag ceremony. The teachers were arguing about positions when I looked toward the flagpole. There were 4 of them standing there, facing the flag, motionless. I blinked, and they were gone. That night, the security guard refused to patrol the yard. He said he heard marching after midnight, heavy boots, synchronized steps circling the field. When he looked out from the guard post, he saw silhouettes moving across the grass, their heads bowed. He shouted, but they turned toward him. He swore they had no eyes. By morning, he'd quit. He packed his things and never came back. The following week, the principal tried to calm everyone down, saying it was just superstition. But during the next Monday ceremony, as the flag rose, the microphone suddenly screeched, the national anthem cut off mid-line, and everyone froze. The music stopped, but the marching didn't. We all heard it, footsteps behind us, hundreds of them, moving in perfect unison. I turned slowly, and for a second I saw them again, the soldiers standing among us. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and blood ran down their collars like fresh wounds. Then the sound faded, leaving only the flutter of the flag and the terrified breathing of hundreds of students. Now, every year on Independence Day, people claim they still hear those boots, and if you listen closely, you can sometimes hear voices singing the anthem, not from the speakers, not from the students, but from somewhere deep beneath the ground, where the soldiers of that battlefield never stopped standing guard.